You're a good debater and you're not afraid of a fight. So why have your comments off? Just out of curiosity.
Well, I've turned them on for a lot of things.
On your shorts you do.
Right. In some of my lives, I think they're on, but almost as soon as I turn them on, there's photos of my family's homes.
Okay.
What's the address?
Yeah.
And at what point, and I just want to clarify.
Yeah, please.
I don't have to take that abuse.
Agreed.
Like, I don't come to work and slap the dick out of their mouth.
Kind of why do you have a disdain for informants, in your opinion?
I don't disdain them. I downright fucking hate them. That's okay. But see, this is why I can say it. That Jeff's crazy. He's on medication. I have a disdain for them because no man should ever go to prison on the words of another man, number one. Number two, in 90% of the cases you look at, the informant has done more vile and disturbing crap than those that are being accused. Number three, I find it oxymoronic when a man, Joey Merlino, because everybody knows who he is, he goes in front of a judge, they can bring up everything he's ever been accused of, including murders and whatever else. Even though he's acquitted, it doesn't really matter because it's a character judgment. But yet in that same case, you can't turn that around and say, well, let's judge the rat. Judges don't allow that. So for me, it's like you're walking in, you're already behind the eight
And
ball.
now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
Piero Legge era un galantuomo anche se era un corleonese. E dici quello che ha fatto. Piero Legge.
Tu parli di Leggio, parli di Bagarella. Tu quando parli di corleonese ti avessi a lavare e spazzare la bocca. Ti avessi a spazzare la bocca bene con l'aceto. E con l'aceto ti avessi a lavare la bocca tu quando parli di corleonese.
Conosce, ha mai sentito parlare nell'ambiente che ha frequentato di Cosa Nostra, associazione criminale Cosa Nostra?
Guardarsi che io sono avvocato, non ho frequentato nessuna criminale Cosa Nostra e quindi non conosco.
La domanda è se riconosce l'esistenza, se ne ha sentito parlare.
No, non ho sentito parlare.
Non ha mai sentito parlare di Cosa Nostra, non conosce questo organismo?
No.
Non sa nulla di questo?
No, avvocato.
Quindi l'ha letta soltanto sui giornali?
Ma se della televisione, il giornale, sì.
May 23rd, 1992. Italian magistrate Giovanni Falcone, his wife Francesca Morvillo, officers Rocco DiCillo and Antonio Montanaro and Vito Schifani were killed in a 400-kilogram bomb detonated in a culvert on the side of the road. Toto Riina, mob boss of the Corleonesi
had seen enough, and Giovanni Falcone had to go. Giovanni Falcone grew up in central Palermo, via Castrofilippo, just adjacent to the La Calza neighborhood, and he was no stranger to the mafia. One of his early friendships was with Tommaso Spadaro, who would go on to become one of the most notorious drug traffickers and hitman for the mafia. This was a time and age where Sicilians didn't acknowledge the mafia or even give a name to it. Falcone from an early age was taught the value of dignity, honor, and bravery by his father Arturo. It was more important to have values and to work hard than to take shortcuts, and that's one thing that Falcone always kept close to his vest. Growing up, he was no stranger to violence, as during the Allied invasion of Sicily in 1943 had decimated the entire area, but like most Sicilian villages, they began to clean up and reinvent the neighborhood. One of his closest friendships as a child into adulthood was with Paolo Borsellino, who would also go on to become a prosecuting magistrate. The two would play soccer together and were the best of friends. After high school, Falcone would head to the University of Palermo. While at the university, he would bump into his old friend Paolo, who was studying law at the university as well. While Falcone had been raised to be a conservative Catholic, he began to drift towards communism. Borsellino was more religious than Falcone and leaned more towards a conservative thought process. Even though they were both opposed in belief systems, the one thing that they did share was a hatred for the men in the alleyways. They had seen what the mafia, or more so, the Corleonesi, had done to their neighborhoods. They saw the violence and vowed someday to put a stop to it. In 1961, Falcone leaves college with his law degree and goes to work as a lawyer. He would become a judge not 3 years later and adjusted his leaning towards penal law after serving as a district judge. From 1964 to 1978, he would be assigned to the prosecutor's office in Trapani and Marsala before being assigned to the bankruptcy division back in Palermo. In 1980, Falcone joins the Ufficio Istruzioni, which was an investigative branch of the prosecution's office of Palermo. The former head judge, Cesare Terranova, who was very much an anti-mafia judge, had just been assassinated not a year before. 2 months after that, the head police investigator, Boris Giuliano, who spearheaded the investigation into the narcotics trafficking by the mafia, specifically looking into the Spatola and Zerillo faction of the mob. With Judge Terranova's death, Rocco Cinici would take over, but he would also be killed in 1983. May 5th of 1980, Emanuele Basile, who had replaced Giuliano on the narco squad, was also killed. The next morning, Judge Gaetano Costa, at the prodding of others, signed a 55-sheet arrest warrant for members that they alleged were in the Spataro and Zerillo Gambino clan. Cinici named Falcone as the chief investigator in that case. As information began to hit the press about an anti-mafia case spearheaded by Judge Costa, the mob would act, and Costa would be killed on August 6th of 1980. The murder allegedly was ordered by Salvatore and Zerillo. What Falcone does next is he begins to look into new ways of crushing the mafia. Before, the Italian state didn't have any measures in place to arrest men and keep them in prison for life. And one of the new aspects that Falcone was introducing was asset seizure. He wanted to take the mafia's money as a control measure. He knew if they followed the money trail, it would lead to narcotics, money laundering, extortion, and more. He would get bank records from all banks in Palermo and begin researching wire transactions and real estate deals. For the mafia, this was bad news. In their opinion, they had an overzealous prosecutor putting his nose into their affairs. Compounding that issue was his visit to the United States, where he sat with the FBI learning from their investigative techniques. That meeting and experience were so fruitful that he ends up working alongside them in big narcotics cases, including the Pizza Connection, as his role was to follow the money inside of Italy, extending outward to Turkey, France, and other countries. As the Spatola case came to trial in 1981, Falcone would finalize his facts, and the prosecution team would hammer the mafia. 74 convictions based solely on Falcone's evidence from banks, travel records, and more. The next step for Falcone is to take what he used in the Spatola trial and put it into law. This new law was a smaller version of the RICO law, whereby mafia conspiracy would now be a new charge, and it would allow the Italian state to confiscate mafia assets. Home, cars, bank accounts, money, you name it, they could take it. It would take 2 years, but eventually it would pass in Parliament on April 30th of 1982. All of that would lead to Falcone becoming a member of the Anti-Mafia Pool, which was a group of magistrates who were investigating the mafia together. Falcone's old friend Paolo Borsellino would also join that group. The next few years would lead to groundbreaking work as the Anti-Mafia Pool would lay the groundwork for the Maxi Trial, the biggest trial in history against the mafia. Falcone would lead the prosecution team and indict 475 defendants. Of the 475, 338 were convicted, including some who had been tried in absentia, including Toto Riina. A total of 2,665 years in prison were handed out. For 19 mob bosses, they were handed life sentences. In 1988, Falcone would go to work alongside Rudy Giuliani, and they would form an operation based against the Gambino crime family and the Inzerillo crime family, and the mob finally had enough. On June 20th of 1989, a stack of dynamite was found near a beach house that Falcone was renting. At the time of the attempted hit, he was investigating the Swiss bank account records, which was a funnel for mafia money. It was Falcone's belief that it wasn't just the mafia, but also some within the government who wanted him dead. Through the investigation into Switzerland, they would find that Palermo police chief was tipping off local mafia members before arrests and indictments. In March of 1991, Falcone would transfer to Rome, and he would create massive trouble. He specifically went after Judge Corrado Carnevale, who was light on sentences with the mobsters. It was Judge Carnevale who either gave light sentences to those in the Maxi Trial or even let some of them leave prison early without doing much time at all. Falcone was irate. He would form the Martelli Decree, which would allow the government to rearrest all of those that Carnevale had let out or gave light sentences to. To confront politics, Falcone would ensure that Carnevale, who he thought was corrupt, prevented him from actually reviewing the sentences he put forth at the Maxi Trial. That move destroyed any chances that the mafia could get an appeal, and it meant convictions would be upheld at the Supreme Court level. The move infuriated the mafia, but it specifically infuriated Toto Riina. Riina knew that Falcone was intermingling and backstabbing among the elite, and he had heard through others that Falcone in his own way was just as bad. There was a lot of double dealing going on, and Riina had the inside track to Italian politics, and he knew that Falcone was loathed at the government level. There were a lot of crooked politicians and those in government who were getting massive kickbacks from men like Riina in return for looking the other way. And Falcone was viewed as an upstart, someone who just couldn't stay out of their business. As a result, Riina began putting things in motion. His first move was to whack Salvatore Lima, who was a heavy-hitting politician with his hands in the mob's pockets and as well as the government's. Riina viewed him as an ally of Giulio Andretti, former Prime Minister of Italy, and Falcone. Lima would be shot dead in March of 92. Riina also wanted Falcone dead. Not only was Falcone meddling in mob business, but his associations with people that Riina believed was total hypocrisy. Not only was the mafia under assault, but their money was as well. Something had to be done to show Falcone that Toto Riina controlled Sicily, not the government, not Falcone. Riina would call in Giovanni Brusca, the number one hitter for the Corleonesi, to handle that matter. He wanted Falcone blown up and wanted the murder carried out in Sicily as a statement that the mafia was in control, not Giovanni Falcone. 400 kilos of explosives were set in a culvert under the highway. As the caravan with Falcone got close, Brusca would detonate the bomb by remote while watching from a small outpost in the hills adjacent to Highway A29. The blast was so powerful it registered on the local Richter scale monitors. Riina would get word as the news broke and throw a huge party celebrating the death of Giovanni Falcone. The death of Falcone sparked national outrage and made Falcone a hero and martyr in Sicily. 57 days later, Paolo Borsellino would be killed in a bombing as another message to the Sicilian government that there was only one boss in the country, and that boss was Toto Riina.